and welcome to another evening of frank conversation on hard copy here in our Abuja studios. I'm Kayla Magwa. This week, we turn our lenses towards the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP. Recently, SERAP called on President Bola Tinubu to, in 48 hours, instruct the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited to immediately reverse the recent increase in the pump price of petrol and instruct the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi SAN, alongside other appropriate anti-corruption agencies, to investigate the allegations of corruption and mismanagement in the nnpcl, the spending of the reported $300 million bailout funds obtained from the federal government in August of 2024, and the $6 billion debt it owes suppliers, despite allegations that it hasn't remitted all revenues to the National Treasury. Recently, SERAP asked the National Assembly to disclose the total amount paid to lawmakers as running costs, noting that if that amount is paid into their personal accounts, it amounts to corruption. They also accuse the lawmakers of corruption if they are the ones fixing their running costs, allowances, and salaries. While the quest for accountability championed by SERAP is appreciated by the Nigerian people, it is not the first time SERAP has sought accountability from government and threatened legal action. There was a request for a probe into the $1.5 billion World Bank loan states collected, allegations of mismanagement of $3.121 billion Chinese loans collected by the federal government. They sued the Central Bank of Nigeria over an unaccounted for 100 billion naira missing in dirty notes, local government funds collected by the states and the FCT, and the judgment given in SERAP's favor against the former humanitarian minister, Sadiya Umar Farouk, by a federal high court in Lagos to account for payments of 729 billion naira to 24.3 million poor Nigerians for 6 months. How much success has SERAP had in these cases? Who is SERAP? Who funds them? Why do they care so much about us? Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, SERAP's Deputy Director, joins us today on the program to answer these questions and more. Mr. Oluwadare, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You just told us right now that the DSS were looking for you.
I was told by my colleagues that they came to our Abuja office asking for the directors and mentioning my name. And when my colleagues asked them why, they could only say that they wanted, they didn't give clear answers. And my colleague had told them that if it's for any kind of interaction, even if it's formal, they can always send a formal invitation. We've gotten that in the past, and that's the way to go. So I understand that they came in 2 trucks, I believe. And then
2 trucks?
Yes, as I was told. And I think 2 of them entered the office. And then they stepped out. They were making calls, and then they came back in and said that they needed to have a chat with either myself or any of the officers on the ground.
Did they tell you why?
They didn't venture a reason.
Do you think, can you think of a reason why the DSS will be looking for you right now?
I can't think of any specifically, but of course it would not be connected with our advocacy for transparency and accountability about governance generally, and particularly this administration.
You had recently asked, given a 48-hour ultimatum to the president on this to instruct the nnpcl to reverse the hike in the price of fuel. What kind of response have you gotten so far from that?
None. And it's actually an open letter to the president asking him to instruct the nnpcl to reverse the hike from 600 to 800 naira, and also to give a directive to investigate some of the fundings that come from the federal government to the nnpcl. The case in point is the over $30 million bailout that has been given. And this is against the background of the various inflows of expenditure into the nnpcl over the years, and the allegation of, it's not longer an allegation, the fact the nnpcl has admitted to that the nnpcl owes the suppliers over 6 billion naira. So it's not adding up. And this is against the background of the hardship that Nigerians are facing. And you would agree that the average Nigerian doesn't need to be an economist to understand that he or she is buying fuel at a very high rate and that everything is expensive and that poverty is growing. And that is why we made that call to the president.
You want it reversed to how much?
At least to the initial price. And
what's the initial price?
600 naira. And this is not about the removal of subsidy or not. We need to.
Because that's where I was going to go.
No,
because for many people, they'll say you're asking for something that is probably not possible.
No, this is about transparency and accountability. And the moment you remove transparency and accountability from governance, it becomes worse than a military dictatorship, because that is the hallmark of a democracy. It means the people know what is being done in government. And if there is any sacrifice or anything that the citizens need to know or do, they can't take those steps because they understand.
I mean, when we hear the landing cost for petrol, and then we now see the amount, at the time it was 600 and something naira, it was obvious that something was off. Do you think that subsidy was being paid?
So it's not about whether subsidy is being paid or not. I can only tell you what I think. It is not even fact, which is why the basis of our advocacy is for transparency and accountability. Can the federal government tell us how much it had spent on the nnpc as bailout or loans over the years? And then also order an investigation.
Now, I'm going to get to that bailout bit, but I want to be able to talk about the realities on ground. Yes, of course, the Nigerian is very upset right now. There's so many things that we cannot afford. But, you know, when we saw what the landing cost was and what was being sold at the petrol stations, it was obvious that it didn't make sense. Fuel should have cost a little bit more, which made many people to believe that the subsidy regime, which we thought was gone, is still ongoing because the money didn't add up. Now with an increase, you know, I thought the advocacy will be on where is it that the subsidy that was being paid is no more being paid now, or is there something else going on? But what you're asking for is a reversal. So that's why I'm asking you, when it comes to subsidy payments and the accusations that subsidy was being paid, which is why we could buy at 600 naira, do you think that subsidy was being paid?
We're saying the same thing, Kayla. It's about transparency and accountability. How am I supposed to hold a decision, to have an opinion, and that includes millions of Nigerians, when we do not know the facts? So what is the bailout and the payments to the nnpc for? Is it for the nnpc to meet its indebtedness to the suppliers? At what cost? And so that would let Nigerians know, is there being payments that we can call subsidy? Even if we can argue about the semantics and the nomenclature of it. But if we do not know these things, government can tell us that subsidy has ended, but a practice that is akin to subsidy might still be going on. Bottom line, Nigerians bear the brunt of this hardship, and individuals might be profiteering from all this, which is why our call is for a reversal to what it was before this latest increase to 600 naira. And then concurrently, for the president to order an investigation into the fundings and the expenditure of the nnpcl. And then perhaps Nigerians may begin to see, or perhaps even agree with the president, that subsidy has gone for real, and that all the payments that are being made to Nigerians, which are taxpayers' funds, is justifiable. And that is why we cannot remove transparency and accountability from any aspect of governance. At best, people would hold opinions that government will say is false. But when the people do not know the truth, what do you want them to know?
You know, one question, we're going to get back to the actual issues, you know, because there are a lot of issues that SERAP has raised over the years. We're avid listeners of what SERAP has to say, but we don't really know who you are. Who is SERAP?
SERAP is a non-profit advocacy organization. We've been around for quite a while.
Who owns
since
SERAP?
2004. It's not about own. There is
You've
a
been
governance
you've been
structure.
working. You've been
Since 2004. Yes.
Since 2004 in
Yes,
Nigeria.
Incorporated
Who
at
founded?
the Corporate Affairs
Who
Commission.
founded SERAP?
A group of friends way back in 2004. It actually started as an idea to look into local government accountability. You
Who
would
are these
understand
friends?
that is Mr. Adetokunbo Mumini, Dr. Kola Wole Oliniyan, and Mr. Lateef Yusuf. At that point, you would understand this is just some years into the latest round of democracy at that time, and it had evolved since then. Basically, because they are lawyers and community advocates, it has basically now made SERAP evolve into a legal advocacy organization.
So 3
uses
friends.
Public interest litigation, yes.
They're still the ones who run the organization.
They are the trustees.
They're the trustees of the organization, but you have a country director.
Yes, we have a country. That's it's not. We have a director.
Okay.
That's Mr. Adetokunbo Mumini.
Okay, and you're deputy
Director.
So
I'm deputy director.
who funds the activities of SERAP? Because all these lawsuits cannot be
There are various funders. We have various. We have the MacArthur Foundation, for instance, to give an example. We have the Ford Foundation. We have the Open Society Foundation, and these are foundations that we also know even co-fund government activities, including joint initiatives, sometimes between civil society organizations and government agencies. And the idea is for partnership between civil society organizations and government to ensure that there is transparency and accountability, ultimately so that the people can participate in governance and benefit from it.
I mean, it's a lot of work, from SERAP. So you're funded by, you just mentioned one, MacArthur Foundation.
I mentioned three. Okay. OSF, that's the Open Society Foundation,
yeah.
The MacArthur Foundation, Luminate, and even the Ford Foundation.
Okay. Who checks your financing? Is there some kind of accountability from SERAP?
Will that be related to SERAP or to civil society organizations?
No, SERAP in particular.
When I say, I'm going to speak generically to show the various levels of accountability that we have in civil society organizations. So for instance, SERAP is registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission, where we file returns every year. We also pay our taxes registered with the Federal Revenue, including taxes on VAT and also payments. And so there are various layers. And you would understand that the way civil society organization is run, for every funding that is received, it is targeted toward a specific advocacy. The same way local organizations will receive funding from WHO, for instance, towards advocacy towards HIV eradication and the likes. There is a structure and a program that dictates how those funds are to be spent. So there is a level of accountability that includes submission of reports, which includes a narrative and the outcomes, and even financial reports to the funders. And there are also the level that also, which is to the government in this instance, the various filings. So for instance, at the Corporate Affairs Commission, we file annual returns every year that indicates the level of activities in the organization. And also there is this, what you call special control against money laundering at the EFCC. We also file returns. And so there are various levels of, call it accountability. But you see, it's very important that we understand this narrative. And there's been this pushback for a while in Nigeria, where we've seen government trying to legislate. They call it regulate civil society organizations under the guise that it is under-regulated. I had just mentioned just three out of the many agencies that, I don't want to use the word regulate, but have oversight over what we do as a registered non-governmental organization. So that narrative needs to be corrected. And if you permit me, there's a bit of a spin-off, which is very important that we understand. For instance, when you look at organizations that are involved in humanitarian services, for instance, there may be a lot of inflow of cash, inflows and outflows. That wouldn't be SERAP's case, for instance, because we don't do direct humanitarian activities. So it doesn't even, the handling cash doesn't even come in. So when you look at the risk index for those operating in Northeast and in conflict areas in Nigeria, for instance, the risk will probably be high for what the government will call terrorist financing and money laundering. Not so for organizations like SERAP, where we have even strong policies, anti-cash policies.
I mean, I want to go back to the issue of subsidy. It's a very dicey one, because at the time when the fuel subsidy regime was in full force, SERAP was one of the people at the forefront of saying, this has to end. This doesn't make sense. There's no accountability in this. We need to end the subsidy regime. Now we're seeing a lot of hardship in the country that many people believe is as a result of subsidy being removed. And now you're saying, oh, the president has to reverse the price. Do you understand that in many places right now, they'll be wondering, what does SERAP really want? Do you want the subsidy regime removed, or do you want it to stay? Everyone has been talking about the president and how this is one of the hard decisions that needs to be made for Nigeria to develop. Where do you stand on this assertion?
Kayla, you said it yourself. At that time, the advocacy for removal or retention of subsidy was based on transparency and accountability. And I know the way governance runs, even in the private sector. The president makes decisions based on information available to him. And if the president wants the people to support his policies, he too should make information available to them. That is why I say there's a Ministry of Communication, there's a Ministry of Information, there is a Freedom of Information Act, there is a constitutional provisions in Section 39 that gives Nigerians the right to know. At the time when subsidy was being paid, what we Nigerians here have been hearing from government was that subsidy payments are marred in corruption. So naturally the call is investigate or stop. And that call has been consistent from organizations including SERAP to investigate subsidy payments and the whole structure of subsidy. That wasn't done until it was removed. And now when it is removed, Nigerians are none the wiser about whether subsidy is going on, by whatever name it is called, or how the monies that have been paid to nnpc, even since this administration came in, have been spent. And that is why I would insist, Kayla, that all these conversations, without the benefit of playing to the gallery, we need to institutionalize these issues and focus on the point. It's simply about transparency and accountability.
Welcome back. You're watching Hard Copy coming to you from our studios in Abuja. Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, SERAP's Deputy Director, is our guest tonight. And we are asking how many answers the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project have gotten as they keep asking accountability questions to the Nigerian government. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you very much, Kayla.
So let's go to the argument, really, that Nigeria is having a shrinking civic space. And of course, picking up of the president of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Do you agree that our civic space is shrinking under the Tinubu administration?
Thank you, Kayla. I think it's not an allegation or an argument. It's a fact that we're experiencing a shrinking civic space, particularly within the past few months, more than a year now, under the Tinubu administration. And for context, what's that civic space? It is it's not a physical space. It is that environment that encourages people to participate in governance. And participation, by the way, includes dissent. Participation in a democracy does not mean registering and voting at an election every 4 years. No, or the off-cycle elections. It means people can contribute, including criticize and disagree with government. It means people also have access to information and they can make demands. That is why you see in the Constitution, chapter 4, that lists what is called fundamental rights. There are rights that allow people to engage in governance. So when you look at Section 39, for instance, the right to freedom of expression is split in two, which is why conversations like this, it is that law that allows conversations like this to be possible. It means the right of every Nigerian, whether they belong to the ruling party or not, has the right to know, to receive information, and to also impart such information to other people. And that's why we can have conversations like this. So, in context, can Nigerians speak freely now? Can they complain about governance? Do they have access to information? When they do not have it, can they complain and ask questions? I think the answer is more in the negative in terms of what we've been monitoring and what we've seen over the years.
In your accountability quest from government, how many successes have you registered? Let's say since the Tinubu administration.
Lots of them. And so when you talk of success, you must look at it within the context of what we've been doing over the years.
Well, what do we define as success, though? What I mean by success is cases that you've won and government had to pay compensations or had to release some kind of information. You know, that's what I regard as success. What do you call success?
That is not success. That is rather narrow, Kayla. Okay. Because if you call my advocacy successful because the person I'm advocating against, who has all the powers, that responds to me, that has taken away half my right. It is more or less saying my success in court as somebody who has been wronged is dependent upon whether my adversary shows up in court. No. My success will be if I've gotten what I wanted to achieve with that going to court. So for SERAP, as a legal advocacy organization using public interest litigation, which some people call strategic litigation, the aim is to go to court. And Kayla, if you permit me to explain this concept, Section 6 of the Constitution has envisaged context where people will disagree with one another, where even government agencies will disagree with one another, which is why you see the state government sometimes will go to court against the federal government, where even the citizens will disagree with government. And that is why
I need us to focus here.
No.
When you take the government to court,
I need to create a basis for this.
I understand that. But when you take the government to court for a matter, do you intend to win that matter?
Of course, that is the aim.
Have you ever won any?
Of course, lots of it.
So let's hear about the ones that you've won.
For instance, in 2019, the Federal High Court, Honorable Justice Oguto Igbo, she's retired now, I gave a judgment mandating the Attorney General of the Federation to challenge the illegality of the state pension laws and to ensure that such pensions that have been paid out before then are recovered. And do you know what that means? Billions of naira that are spent across more than 22 states as payments to former governors will stop. That would mean there will be money for the government to spend on critical infrastructure like healthcare and education. Because the refrain from the government over the years is always, we do not have money, we are broke, we have to borrow. If those funds are recovered, then it will stop. And also adjunct to that is the issue of double emolument, which is clearly an infraction of the Constitution. The law of the Constitution is very clear in the Code of Conduct of Public Officers, Section 2, in the 5th schedule of the Constitution. It forbids any public officer, including the President, National Assembly members, ministers, from getting emoluments from a former position or a parent position while also earning from a current position. So it would mean that those in the National Assembly presently who are former governors should stop receiving the pensions that are being paid as former governors and also
have the payments stopped.
Some of them are stopped. For instance, since then, Enugu State has repealed the law Kwara State has repealed the law. Zamfara has repealed the law. And we have Dr.
some
Saraki,
sort of progress.
writing.
Let's go to the humanitarian matter. The humanitarian minister, former humanitarian minister. The case was given in the favor of SERAP.
That judgment is yet to be enforced. And that is why I was trying to
because that's what I want to find out. What happened? What's the judgment? They were supposed to...
There was supposed to be an investigation into how those funds had been spent. Don't forget that suit was based on a freedom of information request, asking the ministry at that time to give details of how much it had received from the federal government purses to use for its ministry for payments to Nigerians who are indigent or who fall into the brackets of the poverty prevention scheme that was going on there, and also to account for how those funds have been spent. And the freedom
they
did it, which is why we went to court. We shouldn't have gone to court. The law mandates the ministry to proactively make the information available to all Nigerians.
Then nothing.
But will you call that a failure? I wouldn't say it's a failure. It's a success, because even the courts, after 3 years in court, agreed with SERAP and the Nigerian people and give that judgment. And that's what I was trying to lay a foundation that just because
so that's interesting that you got a judgment that was in your favor and nothing was.
We have some that hasn't been enforced. Some, including the one we got against the federal government in 2022, also mandating the federal government to give a clear expenditure to Nigerians of how those loans obtained from China to fund infrastructure for security infrastructure in Abuja had been spent. We got that judgment. We wrote to the Attorney General who was in the office then. We didn't get a response. That judgment is also yet to be enforced.
How many letters have you written to the Attorney General? And
lots of it.
And not gotten a response.
Sometimes we get responses, but it's more of promises.
There's a recent one about lawmakers and the payment of their salaries and emoluments and allowances and things like that. You wanted some kind of transparency in that regard. How far have you gone in that suit?
Unfortunately, Kayla, that suit ended up as one of those public interest litigations that we have to spend perhaps 2 or 3 years in court for. We wrote that letter, we didn't get a response, and now we're in court. And it's interesting, Kayla, that these same institutions, in this instance, the National Assembly, will hire lawyers who would come to court to defend the right of a citizen to get information. And that is why we're in court. That matter is pending as I speak.
The lawmakers issue was one that really angered a lot of people because of course, a lot of activities were happening around that same time. The End Bad Governance protest was ongoing. And then, of course, we started seeing lawmakers disclosing how much they make, and there have been conversations about how, look, this man, it's like a cult. They're not going to ever. We're going to make a lot of noise about it. SERAP is going to threaten to sue, and then it would fizzle out and we wouldn't remember it anymore.
No, I don't think
What kind of accountability are you expecting in this regard when it comes to lawmakers' pay? Do you think you're going to get the answers that you want?
Yes, and that was what I was trying to explain what success would mean within the context of our advocacy, because ultimately the aim is for the Nigerian people to own the advocacy. Every senator in the National Assembly and every member of the House of Reps represents a constituency that people voted for them to be there. And so the people must own this advocacy ultimately and ask those pertinent questions. What is the take-home pay of the members of the National Assembly? What does it comprise of? And that also takes us back to the issue of Kayla. During the budgetary process, how much is the recurrent expenditure? How much is the capital expenditure? And that determines actually how Nigerians can know how much they own. So whether it's running costs or by whatever nomenclature is addressed, it is wrong for a senator to take home 20 million naira or above every month, not within the context of growing poverty in Nigeria.
I'm looking down at my notes here. I'm taking a look at all of the cases. There's so many of them. I'm tempted to ask what your yearly budget is. If you have to pursue all these cases, lawyers don't come cheap.
Some of them are taken up by public-spirited lawyers. We have a platform called the SERAP Volunteer Lawyers Network. So we have lawyers, including senior lawyers, who take up these cases for us pro bono. So we have a lot of expenses that are taken care of by lawyers who are so inclined to public interest litigation. Mr.
Kolawole Oluwadare, thank you so much for making our time to speak to us on Hard Copy, and good luck with all the work you have ahead of you.
Thank you very much. It's been a privilege.
That's the program tonight. We have been speaking with Mr. Oluwadare Kolawole, the Deputy Director of SERAP. But it's not over until we've heard from you. So please speak with us using the social media handles showing on your screen. We want to hear from you right here on Hard Copy. Thank you for watching. I'm Kayla Magwa. Good night.